Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This week's featured performer is Marc Zegans, and Marc has been so kind to join me today to do just that for us. So sit back, relax. We're glad you joined us, and welcome our friend Marc.
Thanks so much, Tommy. It's great to be here. I've loved what you folks have been doing with Close to Home and the open mic, and it's a true delight to be your featured reader today. Today I'm going to be reading 4 different pieces, which are sort of a conversation between life and death and other dimensions and sort of what lies beyond. And so the first poem that I'm going to read today is called El Poema De La Casa. And it goes like this. Your walls, summer citrus, salamander, yam, skip-troweled Spanish lace, traveling beside stained and polished concrete floors, the color of mole, coloradito, resting in a bisque earthen bowl, undulate like your hips under the red silk dress you wore the night we met. They are as if your dance was transmuted to frame, fixed yet flowing, carving and cleaving space after your ringed and bangled arms rose to the June sky, the tips of your fingers kissing clusters of stars, moving them into shapes and patterns never seen, the firmament erased, replaced in a moment with surety and delight, the heavens your canvas, matter and light your paint, the swirl of the starry night you made, brought down by hand to this house of stucco and flame, cactus and rain, copper and stone. A seed, a root, a branch, a shrine, a stair to an altar, a veer, awakening at the landing beneath the final flight of tiled risers, painted and fired in the domed kiln behind this house, filled with mesquite, fixing the signs you gathered in your sleep on the roof beside the parapet, in the bed of forged frame and white embroidered sheets. This house a container for the dreams channeled through your heaving body, covered by loose woven white cotton, red threaded along the opening at your throat. Your black hair spread thick on the pillow, your face turned to the moon, ornamented order rising on your in-breath, passing to the walls, on your exhale, buon fresco, set by morning, the murals of the day dancing before children, rubbing early sun eyes as you squeeze oranges and into cobalt blue glass, then sit before plated huevos con chorizo, bare feet, a fork, cool floor. So that's a relatively new piece called El Poema de la Casa. The next piece I'm going to read is a chapbook that was recently published by Cervena Barva Press. It's called The Snow Dead, and it's available through many sources right now, including the Lost Bookshelf, which is Cervena Barva's bookstore, available online there. And this is a series of 23 very brief interlinked poems. And so I'm going to read them on air for the first time end to end. So this is The Snow Dead. They leave their offerings. Quiet falls. I was surprised by the gravel scattered like crumble on top of the glacier. I had imagined it slick, glassy, at the surface, not gridded. And yet this shrinking crack massif held tread. I leaped across the crevasses in the sun-cold, unbleaked afternoon light, turning back to look into the deeper cuts, bluing in the narrows. We peer into history as we stare below the root line. Looking up is more complex, a tracing of past and a hurtling expansion. But in the ice, all is dead, purified, crystalline, and yet blue like life. The offerings are left on the surface, testamentary evidence of the killing. The bodies in ice were never offered, merely preserved, accidents in waiting. On the surface, there is no recovery. The snow dead decay more slowly. The flies do not swarm. We watch. At distance, they appear as black marks, the work of a spare calligrapher who enlivens the field by its small rupture. Gradient enters as we approach, first tone, then hue, then texture, finally wetness. We see the slicked blood, the glistening hair by the wound, the seeping of fluids draws raptors. A fox on fresh snow, its neck broke, slight steam exiting its once clever mouth. Before I knew how to make snow angels, there was the corpse on the bowed lawn, arms thrown wide, palms up, fingers spread, shoed toes pointed toward the sidewalk. When the first snow came, the uncut grass poked up, leaving small circles around stiffened stems, taking season as aberration. The souls speak louder in the graveyard, under winter snow, she said, leaving footprints amongst the headstones. I can't tell you anything. I missed the opportunity. My bones tell no tales. The snow heaves over my recent filled grave. In the spring, it will sink, bedded then with sod. We take the frozen rictus as a grin, as if there were a secret zygomatic joke, less than cosmic, merely private, as if in the life cut short, at the moment of death, why truth is given. It is a lie we tell ourselves. She was a pinup model in World War II, known to millions in glossies, then forgotten, neglected, living still into her 80s, alone in a weathered house above Route 2, attic filled with curling stills, dried ink, and bushels of love letters. The smell of dark wool tweed over dark wool suits, black shoes not meant for snow, leather gloves that will pinch and stain when touched by salt. I would walk through the woods, scavenging fallen branches, the leaf-stripped deadwood, cut it, stack it, and leave it to dry. I could tell by feel how long it had rested in the snow and why. Don't be fooled, he said. Many of the snow dead have life in them yet. Some are simply resting, others hiding in winter. Most don't know. Warmth, a memory lost. Streetlights and silence in this cold place, lit by candles, convenience store chocolate donuts and well-aged wine, our only food, as we sit on the floor, staring out at the snow-clean street. It's 4 a.m. We are the only two people alive. You have no power, nor I, but there is electricity between us. There was always the kid who left in winter after a beating, pissed pants yellowing the snow, never heard from, hardly remembered, family erased, as the house was bought and made fresh in spring. You have collapsed all my angels, all the times I fell back and flapped my arms at 6 a.m. in the newly fallen, as if in the flurry I could leave a mark. Before I could rise, you were stomping free all evidence of my angel's visit, killing his whisper trace in the fragile snow. They carried the body out of the woods, an unseen fall off a granite ledge, the cold a kindness, bringing sleep, a quiet ride into the hereafter. There was no sign of panic or fear, not even pain as he lay there unable. There was no sign of who he was. An identity would be given, but that is no sign. We feel the stillness, witness the white, are quieted. The death is a mark in the snow, a stroke in the larger picture. In spring, it is central, a tear in the fabric there, a loss, now a return. So that's the Snow Dead, this chapbook that I recently created with Jordana Barva Press. And now I'm going to turn to something really quite different. My good friend Noah James Saunders, a sculptor in Athens, Georgia, has begun to create a fictive city, which he calls Ephemera. And he asked me to become the poet laureate of Ephemera. And in that context, I began creating a tarot deck that comes out of the history of the town. And I'm in the process now of writing interpretations of the major arcana. If you're not familiar with the tarot, those are the 22 major cards that define big events and big themes archetypally in the life of an individual seeking counsel and insight from the tarot. So I'm going to read a card that's connected to today's theme. It's called a Sina, which in Portuguese means fate or destiny or a sign. And it's the equivalent to, in some respects, or I should better say, the answer to what in conventional tarot decks is the death card. And it reads as follows. Asina pictures a humble woman with loss in her eyes in a cafe seated across from a gypsy fortune teller. The scene is melancholy, the cafe nearly empty. A scrawny cat walks diagonally across the floor, while another noses a plate of fish bones. The fortune teller has spread cards which we cannot read on a frayed purple velvet cloth. Her right hand gestures to a card, and her mouth is open as if in mid-speech. An empty cup of tea placed on a saucer sits near each woman, with tea leaves in the bottom of the fortune teller's cup, evident to the viewer. A half-eaten Portuguese sweet roll sits next to the woman seeking to know her fortune. Asina, which parallels the death card in the conventional major arcana, is connected to Mort, but differs significantly in tone and meaning. Sina entwines both fate and destiny. Like the death card, Asina suggests that we cannot avoid confrontation with our fate, that such confrontation is inevitable and insurmountable. In contrast to death, however, fate, that which has been determined, becomes binding only if we do not divine and follow our destiny, that which we are meant to do. A fated life in the ephemeran tarot is the result of a failure either to discern or to actively fulfill our destiny. When we abdicate responsibility for living authentically and following our heart's path, fate takes over and leads us to the inevitable consequence of a life led in uncritical conformity to the social role one has been born into, or a life of ambition led at the price of alienation from one's truest and best self. Asina arrives as a sign that the time has come to step forward, open one's heart, and discover, or if already known, embrace one's destiny. The path that was previously obscure now opens with clarity. It is laid out in the cards, but it is a path that requires energy, initiative, the acceptance of loss, the welcoming of mentors, determination, and courage. The tone of the scene is melancholy because the woman who seeks her fortune has experienced great loss, or perhaps has been living in a restricted, hopeless pattern. She fears that she is bound to endure unremitting, downcast life and struggles without success to imagine something better. Yet a small part of her hopes that a fulfilling life, one worth living, still remains possible, even though the vision of what that might be eludes her. Her troubled sense of inevitability connects Asina to the death card. The sorry life she projects, she fears, like the arrival of death, is fated. Stuck in grief, a sense of helplessness, perhaps born of an imposed perception of social obligation, and drained of energy, she asks for hope through the opening of possibility via the fortune teller. For her story to begin, she requires outside intervention. Just as death brings the current tale to an abrupt and incontestable end, the fortune teller comes from beyond as a catalyst, bringing knowledge of the broader world and perhaps of the invisible world, one who can open the door to the new. Unlike death, however, the fortune teller dictates nothing. Instead, she paints pictures, reveals possibilities, and opens a new path to the humble supplicant. For the new story to begin, supplicant must choose against everything prior. to proceed. She must grieve her losses, set aside her conditioning, leave her old world behind, and walk into a new world based on nothing more than the call of her heart and the belief that her destiny lies on the path that will take her from predictable fate. The door to this new world is small. She is without resources, yet is the only means of exiting the perpetual melancholy that will be her fate if she chooses to remain. The skinny cat on the card signifies the thinness of life in this empty town. The cat gnawing on fish bones, a hunger that cannot be satisfied, so long as she accepts the role into which she has been cast. Prospect and nurture lie elsewhere. If she wishes to live on more than scraps, if she wants to know herself, and if she wants to know love, she must move on. Should she follow this path, she may come to discover valuable gifts in herself that she can give to the world, but that is not a given. She may not survive the transition or may struggle along a path, her destiny simply to participate in the life she has chosen. Accepting that the outcome is not given, nor can it be controlled, is the first step she must take to answer her question, who am I and how do I want to live? In ultimate contrast to Mort, Athena says, yes, you can live the moment you give up. All that you have taken is given. And as soon as you permit yourself to grieve what is no more and truly let it pass. When the scenic card is reversed, turned upside down and drawn that way, it says that at this moment there is no sign. You are casting about for signifiers, looking for divination, because you are scared to follow your destiny. You want your fear of living mediated by finding a sense of control in the cards, rather than using these cards to know yourself better and to move more deeply into life, no matter what conditions may arise. So that's an interpretation of one of the cards from the Ephemeron Tarot. And now, Tommy, if you're still there and ready and eager, would you like to pick a card from what's been written so far of the major arcana? Any card from 1 to 18
Yeah,
that suits your pleasure, other than 14, which is the one I just read.
I'll go one down, and I will pick 13 since I'm feeling lucky.
That's a great lucky number, and it's a fun card. So this one is called A Inversão, which in Portuguese means the inversion. And it's comparable to the Hanged Man in the traditional tarot, but has some significant differences. Inversão, the inversion, is presented either as a man dressed in jester's garb, walking happily on his hands past a stone fountain in a cobbled square, a cheerful crowd watching and joking as small children run about, or as a lone woman standing on the bottom of the planet, plaintively reaching out to the heavens below. On occasion, the two images are combined into a single card, divided by a vertical diagonal. Inversão shares with the Hanged Man a reversal of perspective. But in the case of the jester, this reversal is happily chosen, bringing delight to passerby and children playing in the street. The representation of the woman standing at the bottom of the planet, facing down to the heavens, presents more complex considerations. Is it simply our perspective that is reversed, while from her she is facing up and out to the sky above? Is this her natural abode? Did she travel to this place after a great loss? Was her location in solitude forced upon her? What is the source of her pain? And why does she appeal to forces beyond her reach? Is this an appeal for grace? We have no answers to these questions from the information provided, but our own situation and the question we have brought to the reading may provide clues. Have we become rigid in our views? Do we take our orientation as inherently correct, rejecting others as somehow aberrant or distorted? Do we see ourselves at the center of life with the world and the cosmos circling around us? Do we suffer from inflation? If any of these, perhaps the arrival of the female inverted suggests a change in perspective is in order, perhaps a shift to a more relative point of view. What if indeed we are upside down in our own thinking? Unlike the Italian version of the Hanged Man, neither version of Versailles represents the forcible abduction and hanging of a traitor. The hanging by a single foot representing the turncoat's betrayal. While it is possible that the inverted woman was exiled to her location, she is unbound, free to move about and engage in her journey. In Versailles represents an inversion, an active reversal of perspective, not a suspension, though the inverted woman bears perhaps some analogy to the Norse Odin, who sought wisdom by hanging upside down from a tree. In contrast to Odin, the inverted woman is clearly human and reaches out for guidance rather than turning inward in contemplation. Her outward orientation is shared by the jester, who directs his energies to spirited play before the crowd. He brings joy and humor to the moment, brightening the day of the passerby and reminding the children at play that their parents don't have all the answers. In contrast to Odin, who seeks to become wise by adopting alternative points of view, the jester gives not a thought to wisdom, merely to his pleasure and that of the crowd. But it is this jester's abiding state, or when he flips from hands to feet, he's gripped by mortal fears and concerns. In his inversion, a gambit, an escape from history and the burdens of adulthood. Is his public buffoonery a happy constant, the expression of a life lived without a hint of self-limiting doubt? In Versailles reversed, the ground now bearing down on the jester's hands suggests that you may have assumed the weight of the world, bearing burdens that are perhaps not yours, as a way to escape your own smaller, more human responsibilities, or perhaps to divert attention to your burdens and provide excuse for your shortcomings. The upright jester suggests that perhaps it's time to lighten up. The inverted woman set upright indicates that you and she share a common perspective. As you are situated behind her, she opens the heavens and the songs of the stars to you. Her plaintive expression and outreached arms suggest that she is pleading on your behalf, perhaps because you have not yet come into contact with your grief, or perhaps because you are in need of grace, unwarranted but necessary mercy. In Versailles, inverted, suggests that it is time to open your heart to all that lies before you and to invite and accept the love, grace, and wisdom that will allow you to feel held and show you that you are whole. So that, Tommy, is in Versailles.
My goodness. Wow.
And I think it's sort of fitting that you picked a card where you've got a person who's got a rich and deep inner life outside of what you do, but that is a host of these proceedings. You're there to welcome and entertain the people out there in the world.
Yeah, it hit a little close to home, definitely. No pun intended, actually. Yeah, close to home. Oh man.
Very cool. So I'm going to read one more. This one is called Hauling Up Mermaids, and it was performed in public for the first time at Pearl Hour in Monterey in a show called Sirens, Dreams, and a Cat that was produced by another close to home participant, Janice Blaze Rock. And it was just shortly before the COVID lockdown began. So this was one of my final things that I read in public. Cool. It's called Hauling Up Mermaids. The days of summer boats now gone, the gray-sprayed rock jetties silent, cast out, cracked and quarried to break the line of water. Swell full mouth, dead waking, an apparition. I put up the mast, fastened stays, recalled lobstermen with rock salt loaded in shotguns who fired when we came too close to their pots, striped and chipped buoys, a warning. Dropped in centerboard and rudder, hoisted sail, and took the tiller gliding out from the small harbor, spindrift spatter burning my cheek, blood raising, a recognition. The quiet chop and lap of waves against the hull, sitting windless in a fog bank tasting of kelp. I could feel the long carried rot in this diffusion, a sign. And into my mainsail came gasps. A gathering of distant cries, the sounding of expiration, reflected between the gunnels, raising cilia, a toxin. Calling winds that set me running through the sea fret, an ancient har, enshrouding these sullied waters, sails set wing to wing, hull planing in the mystic, a summoning that lifted me out of myself. I was simply hand on tiller skimming silent into the white. I felt a pull as if true north had fixed my eyes, a quickening. Covering distance without time until there was a hole and light, a shaftway beacon through the broom, to a windless strewn splash, debris floating round a tattered gill net. 4 bickered bodies, torn and spent, sucking and spitting surface brine, their white skin gone greener than scales, tails drained of iridescence, caught in lines and mesh, a trawling. As my luft boat came round and by, it was their eyes stripped of all sense, so wide and lost, their world betrayed, eyes beyond asking and sorrow, that were as mine, a communion. And then there was the work of it, drawing near the net, unfolding the wood-handled knife bought in France with a metal collar you twist to lock the blade, a steadying. The cutting, the reaching, the lifting, the embrace of a near-dead soul, the scum of the sea on her skin, her tail's erratic final beats, and then the next, a lament. 3 backs pressing against the foredeck, and one leaning on another's shins, breathing slowly on the port bench as, like the others, her tail turned to a vapor, a becoming. Their conveyance done, the fog opened to the afternoon sun. I could feel their thoughts traveling between them like a sea current, invisible and fast, a flow. Connected again by touch, this group of once oceanids resonated with a low hum, their eyes clearing, their hair losing the stink of the sea, arising. And then one spoke as a chorus, the others in naked unison, swaying with the tones of her voice. Do you remember when you pulled her bleeding from the sea? A rescue. I nodded. Her hair was short brown then. It is gray now. You wouldn't know. We were there, far beneath, you know. We tasted her blood, saving her and you from the sharks. A blessing. So she is in and among us, and we are connected to the land through her and through the life you saved. And you sat shivering in your boat because you gave her your sweater, the color of seawater and peat, a conduit between our worlds, like the fog that brought you to us, with the knife you carried all these years, cutting us free to live on land. Now that our world has been destroyed, we can never go back. Sobbing spread between them, shaking the boat, causing furious waves to rise, crashing over the hull. Awake. The roiling dropped and ended. The weathered sun had found the land, casting a stripe from harbor out, bringing us warmly into the bay and to the promise of different lives. So that's Hauling Up Mermaids, and that's what I've got for you today.
Marc, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. There will be links in the info for where you can find more work from Marc, and stay tuned for many more wonderful poets and artists. We're so lucky. Thank you again, Marc.
Thank you, Tommy.